The kitchen knife slipped from my hand and clattered onto the marble countertop as I heard those words echo from the living room. "Oh, you're her ex. She said a lot about you." "I'm Jack Barron's, and that was my wife's boss talking about me like I was yesterday's garbage at what was supposed to be Sabrina's 34th birthday party, in my own damn house. Let me paint you a picture of how this night started. I'd spent 3 hours setting up our open-plan living room with those pretentious string lights Sabrina loves, arranging catered appetizers on our best plates, and chilling champagne that cost more than most people's car payments. The whole suburban Boston neighborhood could probably hear the laughter spilling out of our windows. Sabrina floated around in that black cocktail dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, accepting compliments like a queen holding court. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked beautiful, and she knew it. What I didn't know was that she'd been telling people we were separated. "Jack's just helping out tonight," I heard her tell someone earlier. "We're figuring things out." Figuring things out? News to me, considering we'd shared a bed last night and she'd made me coffee this morning like she had for the past 8 years. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked toward the living room, my work boots silent on the hardwood floors. Charles Fairchild, Chip to his friends, stood near our fireplace holding a glass of my good scotch. Mid-40s, silver at the temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month running my small construction business. "There he is!" Chip raised his glass when he spotted me. "The famous ex-husband. Sabrina's told us so much about you." The room went quiet. About 15 people, Sabrina's work colleagues, her parents, and a few neighbors, all turned to stare. I felt like I was watching a movie where someone else was playing my life. "Ex-husband?" I kept my voice level, though my jaw was tight enough to crack walnuts. "That's interesting. When exactly did that happen?" Sabrina's face went pale under her makeup. Her best friend Hannah, a sharp-faced woman who worked in corporate HR with Sabrina, quickly stepped between us. "Oh, you know how office gossip gets twisted," Hannah said with a nervous laugh. "People hear what they want to hear." But Chip wasn't backing down. The alcohol had made him bold. "Come on, don't be modest. Sabrina said you two have been living separate lives for months. Different bedrooms, different schedules. Very mature way to handle things." I looked at my wife. She was studying her champagne glass like it held the secrets of the universe. Her parents, Richard and Margaret Whitmore, stood near the window wearing expressions of barely concealed disgust. They'd never thought I was good enough for their precious daughter, and apparently they were about to be proven right. "Well," I said, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass, "you seem to know more about my marriage than I do, Chip. That's enlightening." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with one of my power tools. I excused myself and headed back to the kitchen, my mind racing. In the span of 5 minutes, I'd learned that my wife had been rewriting our story, and I was apparently the villain in her new version. I pulled out my phone and started the voice recorder app. Call it instinct, but something told me I was going to need evidence of whatever was about to unfold. Hannah followed me into the kitchen a few minutes later, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She glanced around nervously before speaking. "Jack, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Really? What kind of misunderstanding?" She moved closer, lowering her voice. "Sabrina's been under a lot of stress at work. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're overwhelmed." "What kind of things, Hannah?" "Well," she bit her lip. "She might have mentioned that you two were having problems, and there was something about a hotel reservation, but I'm sure it's not what you think." Hotel reservation. My blood turned to ice water, but I kept my expression neutral. "What hotel reservation?" Hannah's eyes went wide as she realized her mistake. I shouldn't have said anything. It's probably just for a work retreat or something." "On her birthday weekend?" "Jack, I really think you should talk to Sabrina directly about this." She hurried back to the party, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the sound of laughter from the other room. I stood there for a moment, processing what I'd just heard, when I noticed Sabrina's phone buzzing on the counter. She'd left it there while she played hostess. The text preview on the lock screen made my stomach drop. "Can't wait to unwrap you later. Room 412. C for Chip, her boss. The man who'd just called me her ex-husband in front of half our social circle." I took a photo of the screen with my phone, my hands surprisingly steady. 8 years of marriage, and this is how I find out it's over. Not through an honest conversation or even a fight, but through a drunk boss's slip of the tongue and a sexting mistake. I walked back into the living room, where the party was in full swing again. Sabrina was laughing at something one of her colleagues was saying, her hand resting on Chip's arm in a way that suddenly seemed far too familiar. How long had this been going on? How many of these people knew what was happening while I'd been playing the oblivious husband? The rest of the party passed in a blur. I played my part, refilling drinks and making small talk, all while my world crumbled around me. Every laugh felt like a knife twist, every knowing glance between Sabrina and her friends, another confirmation that I was the last to know about my own life. When the last guest finally left around midnight, Sabrina kicked off her heels and started collecting empty glasses. "Great party," she said, without looking at me. "Thanks for helping with everything." "Helping? In my own house for my own wife's birthday?" She paused, a stack of plates in her hands. "Jack, you're being dramatic." "Am I? Because your boss seemed to think we were divorced. Where would he get an idea like that? Chip had too much to drink. You know how men get when they're trying to impress people." "Impress people by calling me your ex-husband?" She set the plates down harder than necessary. "Look, I may have mentioned that we've been having some issues lately. People at work notice when you're stressed." "What issues, Sabrina? Because up until tonight I thought we were fine." She turned to face me then, and I saw something cold in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. "Maybe that's the problem, Jack. Maybe you don't notice a lot of things." I wanted to confront her about the text message, about the hotel reservation Hannah had mentioned, about the way she'd been looking at Chip all night, but something held me back. Maybe it was the voice recorder still running in my pocket, or maybe it was the realization that I needed to be smarter about this. "You're right," I said finally. "Maybe I haven't been paying close enough attention. But I'm going to start now." She studied my face for a moment, then shrugged. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed." I watched her walk up the stairs to our bedroom, apparently still our bedroom, despite what she'd told her colleagues. After I heard the door close, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the photo of her text message. "Room 412. Can't wait to unwrap you later." My wife of 8 years was having an affair with her boss, had been telling people we were separated, and had just humiliated me in front of half the neighborhood. The old Jack might have stormed upstairs for a screaming match or packed a bag and left, but the old Jack was apparently too stupid to see what was happening in his own marriage. The new Jack was going to be a lot more careful, and a lot more dangerous. I deleted the voice recording app from my recent apps and uploaded the audio file to a secure cloud storage account. Then I opened my laptop and started researching Charles Fairchild. If my wife wanted to play games, it was time she learned that I was better at them than she thought. I didn't sleep much that night. While Sabrina snored softly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and planned my next moves. By morning, I had a strategy. First stop, Big Mike's garage. Mike Kowalski had been my best friend since high school and the closest thing I had to a brother. If anyone would give me straight advice and help me figure out what to do next, it was him. I found him under the hood of a Ford F-150, his massive frame barely fitting in the engine compartment. At 6'4" and pushing 300 pounds, Mike looked like he could bench press a car, but he had the gentlest soul of anyone I knew. Jackie boy, he boomed when he saw me. How was the birthday bash? Sabrina have a good time? That's actually what I need to talk to you about. Mike's expression grew serious as I told him about the previous night. I showed him the photo of the text message and played the recording of my conversation with Hannah. By the time I finished, his face was dark with anger. That cheating bitch, he growled, and her scumbag boss. What do you want to do about it? I want proof, real proof, not just suspicions and overheard conversations. Mike wiped his hands on a rag and thought for a moment. You got security cameras at the house? Basic system, motion sensors, a few cameras covering the entrances. Check the footage from the last few weeks. Look for patterns, times when she's leaving the house when she said she'd be somewhere else, cars you don't recognize in the driveway. It was good advice. I spent the next few hours at home going through weeks of security footage while Sabrina was at work. What I found made my stomach turn. 3 weeks ago, Sabrina's car leaving at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, returning at 2 a.m. She'd told me she was having a girls' night with Hannah. 2 weeks ago, a silver BMW in our driveway at midnight on a Thursday. I'd been out of town on a job. The car stayed for 4 hours. 1 week ago, Sabrina leaving the house at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, wearing workout clothes. She'd said she was going to yoga class. The class didn't start until 9 a.m. I ran the BMW's license plate through a contact I had at the DMV. It came back registered to Charles Fairchild. So not only was my wife cheating on me, she was bringing her lover to our house, in our bed, using our home as their personal love nest while I was out working to pay the mortgage. I called Mike back. I need you to help me with something tonight, and bring Tiny. Tony, Tiny. Ricci was Mike's cousin and the opposite of his nickname, a former bouncer who stood 6'6" and weighed 350, all muscle. Despite his intimidating appearance, he was actually a gentle giant who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, but he was loyal to his friends and had a talent for making people nervous just by standing near them. That evening, I suggested to Sabrina that we grab dinner at the Pilgrim's Rest, a local bar that served as the unofficial gossip headquarters for our neighborhood. She seemed surprised, but agreed. The Pilgrim's Rest was exactly what you'd expect from a suburban Boston bar: dark wood, brass fixtures, and locals who'd been drinking there since the Carter administration. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and news traveled faster than the internet. We'd been there about an hour when Chip Fairchild walked in with a group of people I recognized from Sabrina's office. Perfect timing. Well, look who it is, I said loudly enough for half the bar to hear. Chip, come over here, buddy. Sabrina's face went white, but Chip, apparently not learning from his mistake the night before, swaggered over with a confident smile. Jack, Sabrina, fancy seeing you two here. I stood up and clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make him wince. I wanted to thank you, Chip, for taking such good care of my wife. The bar was getting quieter as people started to pay attention to our conversation. Sabrina was gripping her wine glass so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Taking care of her? Chip's voice was slightly higher than usual. Oh, come on, don't be modest. All those late nights at the office, the weekend work sessions, the business trips. It's so nice that Sabrina has a boss who's so hands-on. I let the last words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Several people at nearby tables were openly staring now. Jack, Sabrina said through gritted teeth, maybe we should go. Nonsense. I'm just expressing my gratitude. It's not every day you meet a man who's willing to go above and beyond for his employees, really puts in the extra effort to make sure they're satisfied with their work environment. Chip was sweating now, and his colleagues were starting to whisper among themselves. The bartender, an old-timer named Murphy, who'd been serving drinks here for 30 years, was watching the show with obvious amusement. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, Chip said. Oh, I don't think so. I understand perfectly. You're the kind of boss who really gets to know his employees. Personal attention, one-on-one meetings, very thorough performance reviews. By now, the entire bar was listening. Sabrina looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, and Chip's face was red with embarrassment and growing anger. I think you've had too much to drink, Jack. I smiled and took a sip of my beer. Actually, I'm stone cold sober, maybe for the first time in months. Chip mumbled something about needing to get back to his table and practically fled. Sabrina excused herself to the bathroom, and I could hear her angry whisper on her phone as she passed the hallway. Mission accomplished. By tomorrow morning, half the neighborhood would be gossiping about the weird tension between me, my wife, and her boss. Seeds of doubt had been planted. When we got home, Sabrina exploded. What the hell was that about? What was what about? Don't play dumb with me, Jack. That little performance at the bar, you embarrassed me in front of my colleagues. I was just being friendly, making conversation. You were being an ass, and you were making implications that could damage my career. What implications? I just said your boss takes good care of you. Isn't that true? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how much I actually knew. You're acting paranoid and jealous, and it's not attractive. Jealous? Of what? Of the fact that I have a successful career and professional relationships that don't revolve around you. Professional relationships? Is that what we're calling it? Calling what? I almost showed her the photo of the text message right then. Almost confronted her with the security footage and the license plate records. But something held me back. Maybe it was the cold calculation in her eyes, or maybe it was the realization that she was still lying to my face even when caught red-handed. Nothing, I said finally. You're right. I'm probably just being paranoid. She relaxed slightly. Good, because you're starting to sound crazy, and that's not good for either of us. Crazy. That was rich, coming from a woman who was cheating on her husband and gaslighting him about it. After she went to bed, I sat in my basement workshop and made plans. I'd given her a chance to come clean, and she'd chosen to keep lying. Now it was time to play hardball. I pulled out my laptop and started researching private investigators, divorce lawyers, and asset protection strategies. If Sabrina wanted to play games, I was going to make sure I was ready for whatever came next. But first, I had some more detective work to do. I pulled up her credit card statements online, we'd shared accounts since we got married, and started looking for patterns. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, purchases I didn't recognize. What I found made everything crystal clear. Monthly charges to the Fairmont Hotel downtown. Always on the same day of the week, always for the same amount. The timing matched perfectly with her late work meetings and client dinners. I cross-referenced the dates with my work schedule and found the pattern. Every time I was out of town on a job, every time I worked late, every time I had plans that would keep me away from home, those were the nights she was at the hotel. They'd been planning around my schedule, using my own work against me to create opportunities for their affair. The betrayal was so calculated, so deliberate, that it took my breath away. I printed out 6 months of credit card statements and highlighted every suspicious charge. Then I created a timeline matching her hotel visits with her excuses and my work schedule. The evidence was overwhelming. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She's going to ruin you. Get out while you can. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering who had sent it and how they knew what was happening. But more importantly, I wondered if they were right. Was I walking into a trap by staying and fighting? Would it be smarter to just cut my losses and run? I looked around my basement workshop, the place where I'd built furniture for our home, where I'd crafted the custom cabinets for our kitchen, where I'd spent countless hours creating things with my hands while my wife was upstairs planning my destruction. Number 1, I wasn't running. This was my house, my life, my marriage. If Sabrina wanted a war, She was going to get one, but it was going to be fought on my terms with my rules. I deleted the anonymous text and went back to my research. By the time I finally went to bed, I had a plan that would make my wife and her lover wish they'd never been born. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to downtown Boston. I had some shopping to do. First stop, an electronics store where I bought a small voice-activated recorder, the kind private investigators use for surveillance. The kid behind the counter, who couldn't have been more than 20, gave me a knowing look when I asked about battery life and sound quality. "Cheating spouse?" he asked. "Something like that." "This model will run for 12 hours on a single charge and picks up conversations from 15 feet away. Just saying." Second stop, a uniform rental shop where I rented a delivery company uniform and borrowed a clipboard. Amazing how invisible you become when you're wearing the right outfit and carrying official-looking paperwork. Third stop, Sabrina's office building. The Whitmore and Associates building was one of those glass towers that screamed corporate success. Sabrina worked on the 15th floor in human resources, and I'd been there enough times for company parties to know the layout. I waited in the lobby until I saw a group of delivery guys heading for the elevators, then fell in step behind them. The security guard barely glanced at my uniform and clipboard. Sabrina's office was in the corner, with a clear view of the city and enough space for a small conference table. Her assistant's desk sat outside, currently empty since it was lunchtime. I slipped into Sabrina's office and quickly planted the voice recorder under her desk, using a small piece of magnetic tape to secure it to the metal frame. The whole operation took less than 30 seconds. On my way out, I nodded to the security guard like I belonged there. He nodded back and went back to his newspaper. That evening, I retrieved the recorder while Sabrina was in the shower. What I heard made my blood boil. "Hannah, I'm telling you, he's starting to suspect something." Sabrina's voice was crystal clear on the recording. "What makes you think that?" Hannah's voice, slightly more distant but audible. "The way he acted at the bar last night. And he's been asking weird questions about my schedule. Maybe you should back off with Chip for a while. Let things cool down." "Are you kidding? Do you know how much money Jack has tied up in that business of his? The house, the investments, the retirement accounts? I'm not walking away from 8 years of marriage with nothing. So what's your plan?" "I've been documenting everything. His drinking, and before you say anything, I know he only has a couple beers, but I can make it sound worse. His temper, his jealousy, his controlling behavior." "Sabrina, that's not really fair." "Fair? Hannah, I'm 34 years old. I can't start over with nothing. By the time the divorce is final, I'll have enough evidence to prove he's an unfit husband, emotional abuse, financial control, maybe even some physical intimidation if I play it right." "Jesus, Sabrina. Don't give me that tone. You think Chip is going to leave his wife for me if I'm broke? Men like him don't marry down. I need to come out of this divorce with enough money to maintain my lifestyle." "What if Jack fights it?" "With what? He's a blue-collar contractor who barely finished high school. I have a master's degree and work in corporate HR. Who do you think a judge is going to believe?" I had to pause the recording because my hands were shaking with rage. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to destroy me financially and personally. She was going to paint me as an abusive husband and take everything I'd worked for. The recording continued with more details about her strategy. She'd been keeping a journal of my supposed bad behavior. She'd been meeting with divorce lawyers. She'd even been talking to a therapist about her traumatic marriage to establish a paper trail. But the most damaging part came at the end of the conversation. "The beautiful thing is that Jack is so trusting, he has no idea what's coming. By the time I'm done, he'll be lucky to keep his truck." I sat in my basement workshop staring at the recorder and realized that the anonymous text message had been right. She was going to ruin me. But now I had something she didn't know about. Her own words, recorded without her knowledge, proving that she was planning to commit perjury and fraud in divorce court. The next phase of my plan required help, so I called Mike and Tiny. We need to have a conversation with Chip, I told them. What kind of conversation? Mike asked. The kind that helps him understand the consequences of his actions. We met at the Fairmont Hotel downtown at 6 p.m. I'd checked Sabrina's credit card that morning and confirmed she had a reservation. Her car was in the parking garage, along with Chip's silver BMW. There, I pointed to the BMW. That's his car. Tiny pulled a small toolkit from his jacket pocket. What are we thinking? Sugar in the gas tank? Slash the tires? Nothing that obvious. I want him inconvenienced and humiliated, not calling the police. Mike grinned. I have an idea. 20 minutes later, Chip's car had 4 flat tires, not slashed, just deflated, a parking ticket tucked under the windshield, fake but official looking, and a bag of frozen shrimp stuffed into the air conditioning vents. The shrimp would thaw and start to smell in a few hours, making the car unusable until he could figure out where the odor was coming from. Classy, Tiny observed. Smelly, but classy. We waited in Mike's truck until Chip and Sabrina came out of the hotel around 9 p.m. They were holding hands and laughing until they saw the condition of his car. I couldn't hear what they were saying from our distance, but their body language told the story. Chip was furious, gesturing wildly at his flat tires. Sabrina was looking around nervously, like she suspected this wasn't a coincidence. Chip called someone, probably AAA, while Sabrina called an Uber. Their romantic evening had just turned into a logistical nightmare. Phase 1 complete, I told Mike as we drove away. The next morning, I got a call from Mrs. Dorsey, our elderly neighbor. Eleanor Dorsey was 78 years old, lived alone with 3 cats, and knew everything that happened on our street. She was also surprisingly tech-savvy for her age and had security cameras covering her entire property. Jack, dear, could you come over for a cup of coffee? I have something I think you should see. Mrs. Dorsey's kitchen was exactly what you'd expect. Floral wallpaper, doilies on every surface, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. But her computer setup was state-of-the-art. I've been meaning to talk to you about this for weeks, she said, pulling up video files on her computer. I didn't want to pry, but after what I saw last night, I think you need to know what's been going on. The video showed Chip's BMW pulling into our driveway at 11:30 p.m. the previous Tuesday. The timestamp matched one of the nights I'd been working late on a job in Worcester. This isn't the first time, Mrs. Dorsey said gently. I have footage going back 2 months, always when you're not home. She showed me clip after clip of Chip's car in our driveway, sometimes staying for hours. In one video, I could clearly see him and Sabrina kissing on our front porch before going inside. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because you're a good man, Jack. You've helped me with my gutters, shoveled my driveway, never asked for anything in return. You deserve better than this. I thanked Mrs. Dorsey and asked her to save the video files. She promised to keep them safe and offered to testify if I ever needed a witness. Walking back to my house, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had everything I needed now. Audio recordings of Sabrina planning to defraud me in divorce court, video evidence of her affair, financial records showing their hotel meetings, and a neighbor willing to testify about what she'd witnessed. But I wasn't ready to play my hand yet. First, I wanted to see how far Sabrina was willing to go with her lies, and I wanted to make sure Chip understood that his actions had consequences. That evening, I suggested to Sabrina that we have dinner at home and try to work on our communication issues. She seemed pleased that I was apparently buying into her narrative about our marriage problems. Over wine and take-out Chinese food, she launched into a carefully rehearsed speech about how we'd grown apart and needed to find ourselves as individuals. It was like listening to a script from a bad daytime TV show. Maybe we should consider a trial separation, she said, not meeting my eyes. Just to give ourselves some space to think about what we really want. Is that what you want, Sabrina? I think it might be best for both of us. We could divide expenses fairly, and you could stay in the guest room until we figure out a more permanent arrangement. I almost laughed. She wanted me to pay for the house while she used it as a love nest with her boss. The audacity was breathtaking. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, I lay in bed listening to her breathe and planning the final phase of my revenge. She wanted to play games. She wanted to lie and cheat and steal everything I'd worked for. Fine. But she was about to learn that I was much better at this than she thought. I didn't have to wait long for my opportunity. 3 days later, Sabrina announced she was working late on a special project for Chip. She'd be home around midnight. Instead of heading to my workshop like usual, I got in my truck and drove to her office building. Sure enough, at 7:30 p.m., I watched Sabrina and Chip leave together in his car. They weren't going back to their usual hotel, though. Tonight, they were heading somewhere new. I followed them through the winding streets of downtown Boston, staying far enough back to avoid detection. They ended up at an upscale restaurant in the North End, the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance. Through the window, I could see them at a corner table, leaning close together, looking for all the world like a couple celebrating an anniversary. Chip had brought flowers. Sabrina was wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for Christmas. I took photos with my phone, making sure to capture their faces and the intimate nature of their dinner. Then I settled in to wait. They finished dinner around 9:30 and drove to Chip's apartment building, a luxury high-rise in Back Bay that probably cost more per month than most people made in a year. I parked across the street and watched them disappear into the building. At 10:45, my phone rang. Sabrina. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "Just wanted to let you know I'm going to be even later than I thought. This project is really complex." "No problem," I said. "Take all the time you need." "You're the best. Love you." "Love you too." I hung up and stared at Chip's building, where my wife was currently in bed with another man while lying to me on the phone. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. At 11:30, I called Mike. "I need you and Tiny to meet me downtown. Bring the truck." "What's the plan, Jackie?" "It's time to have that conversation with Chip." Mike and Tiny arrived 20 minutes later, just as Sabrina and Chip were coming out of the building. They walked to the parking garage beneath his building, holding hands and laughing. "Follow them," I told Mike, "but stay back." Chip's BMW pulled out of the garage and headed toward my neighborhood. He was driving Sabrina home, playing the gentleman after their evening of adultery. "He's going to drop her off and drive back here," I said. "That's when we make our move." We followed them to my street and watched from a distance as Chip walked Sabrina to our front door. They kissed goodnight under the porch light, the same porch light I'd installed when we first bought the house. After Sabrina went inside, Chip got back in his car and headed toward downtown. We followed him back to his building and into the underground parking garage. The garage was dimly lit and mostly empty at this hour. Chip parked in his assigned spot and was walking toward the elevator when we intercepted him. "Charles Fairchild," I called out. He turned, and his face went white when he saw me walking toward him with Mike and Tiny flanking me like bodyguards. "Jack, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to have a conversation with you about my wife." Chip glanced around the empty garage, probably looking for security cameras or witnesses. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You've been having an affair with Sabrina for months. Hotel rooms, fancy dinners, romantic evenings in your apartment. Ring any bells? You're crazy." "Am I? Because I have photos of you two at dinner tonight. Video of your car in my driveway. Credit card records showing hotel charges that match your little rendezvous schedule." Chip's face was getting red, and I could see him trying to decide whether to keep lying or go on the offensive. Even if that were true, it's between consenting adults. Your marriage was already over. My marriage was over? When did that happen, Chip? Because nobody told me. Sabrina said you two have been separated for months. She said you were just waiting for the right time to make it official. I stepped closer to him. Mike and Tiny moved with me, and I could see Chip starting to sweat. Sabrina lied to you, just like she's been lying to me. We're not separated. We sleep in the same bed every night. We share the same bank accounts, the same house, the same life. You've been helping her cheat on her husband. I didn't know. Bullshit. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't care because you thought I was some stupid blue-collar guy who'd never figure it out. Chip tried to step around me toward the elevator, but Tiny moved to block his path. At 6'6" and 350, Tiny was an intimidating presence even when he wasn't trying to be. What do you want?
In my house! You bastard!
Relax, man. It's just business.
Please, don't shoot!
Get off!
You won't do it. You don't have the guts.
Don't! Please don't shoot him! Please! I'm begging you! Don't do this! No! Please, no!
Chip asked, his voice higher than usual. I want you to understand something very clearly. My wife is a liar and a cheat, and she's been using you just like she's been using me. But you're too arrogant to see it. You're wrong. Sabrina and I have a real connection. I almost felt sorry for him then. Almost. A real connection? Is that what you call it when she tells you she needs money for a girls' trip while she's actually using your credit card to buy me birthday presents? When she schedules your hotel meetings around my work schedule so she can come home and sleep next to me? When she tells her friends that you're just a stepping stone to a better life? Chip's face went pale. She didn't say that. She said a lot of things, Chip. I have recordings. I pulled out my phone and played a portion of the audio from Sabrina's office, the part where she talked about needing to maintain her lifestyle and how men like Chip don't marry down. Chip listened in stunned silence as his lover's voice filled the parking garage, coldly calculating how to use both of us for her own benefit. She's playing you just like she played me, I said when the recording ended. The only difference is that I figured it out first. Chip was staring at the phone like it had bitten him. I need to talk to her. No, you don't. You need to stay away from her, and you need to stay away from me. Or what? I stepped close enough to smell his expensive cologne. Or I'll make your life very uncomfortable. I know where you work, where you live, what kind of car you drive. I know your schedule, your habits, your weaknesses. And I have friends who are very creative when it comes to making people miserable. Mike cracked his knuckles loudly. Tiny just stood there looking like a mountain of muscle in an expensive suit. You're threatening me, Chip said. I'm explaining consequences. You made a choice to sleep with my wife. Now you get to live with the results of that choice. Chip tried to push past me, and I grabbed him by his tie, pulling him close enough to see the fear in his eyes. Let me make this crystal clear, I said quietly. If I see you anywhere near my wife again, if I find out you've contacted her, if you so much as send her a text message, I will destroy you. Not physically. I'm not going to jail for a piece of garbage like you. But I will make your professional and personal life a living hell. Are we clear? He nodded frantically, and I released his tie. He stumbled toward the elevator, his hands shaking as he pressed the call button. Oh, and Chip? I called after him. You might want to get your car detailed. I think something died in the air conditioning. The elevator doors closed on his terrified face, and Mike started laughing. That was beautiful, Jackie. Did you see him shake? Phase 2 complete, I said. Now comes the fun part. We drove back to my neighborhood in comfortable silence. I was feeling better than I had in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was in control. But as we turned onto my street, I saw police cars in my driveway. "What the hell?" Mike muttered. I parked down the block and walked to my house, where 2 officers were talking to Sabrina on the front porch. She was wearing her bathrobe and had clearly been crying. "There he is," she said when she saw me. "Officers, that's my husband." One of the cops, a middle-aged guy with sergeant's stripes, walked over to me. "Mr. Behrens, your wife called us about a domestic disturbance. She says you've been making threats and acting erratically." I looked at Sabrina, who was watching me with an expression of fake concern. She was putting her plan into action, trying to establish a record of me being unstable and threatening. "What kind of threats, officer?" "She says you've been following her, making accusations about her work relationships, and tonight you didn't come home when you said you would. She was worried about what you might do when you got back." Before I could answer, Mrs. Dorsey appeared from her house in a bathrobe and slippers. "Officers," she called out. I couldn't help but overhear. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." The sergeant looked annoyed at another complication, but he walked over to hear what she had to say. "I've been watching this street for 40 years, Mrs. Dorsey said, "and I can tell you that Jack Behrens is one of the finest men in this neighborhood. If his wife is claiming he's been threatening or unstable, she's lying. Ma'am, this is a domestic situation. It's a situation where a cheating wife is trying to frame her husband," Mrs. Dorsey said firmly. "I have video evidence of her bringing other men to this house when Jack is at work. If anyone's been behaving inappropriately, it's her." The sergeant looked back and forth between Sabrina and Mrs. Dorsey, clearly trying to figure out what was really going on. "Mr. Behrens," he said finally, "where were you tonight?" "Having dinner with friends," I said. "Mike Kowalski and Tony Ricci. We were at Tony's place watching the game." It wasn't true, but Mike and Tiny would back me up if necessary. "You can call them if you want to verify," I added. The sergeant studied my face for a moment, then looked at Sabrina, who was still playing the role of frightened wife. "Mrs. Behrens, has your husband ever physically threatened or harmed you?" "Well, no, but has he ever damaged property or made specific threats of violence?" "Not exactly, but his behavior has been very concerning lately." The sergeant sighed. "Ma'am, being suspicious about your work relationships isn't a crime, and if your neighbor is right about you having an affair, that might explain why your husband has been acting differently." Sabrina's face flushed red. "That's ridiculous. Mrs. Dorsey is a confused old woman who doesn't know what she's talking about." "I may be old," Mrs. Dorsey said tartly, "but I'm not blind, and I'm not confused. Would you like to see the video footage, officers?" The sergeant looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "That won't be necessary tonight. Mr. Behrens, I suggest you and your wife work out your marital problems through proper channels, marriage counseling, lawyers, whatever you need to do. But keep it civil and keep us out of it unless there's an actual crime being committed." After the police left, Sabrina stormed into the house without saying a word to me. Mrs. Dorsey patted my arm sympathetically. "That woman is trouble, Jack. Be careful." I thanked her and went inside, where Sabrina was waiting for me in the kitchen. "How dare you embarrass me like that in front of the neighbors? How dare I? You called the police on me for no reason." "I was scared. You've been acting crazy lately, following me around, making wild accusations." "Wild accusations? Like the fact that you're sleeping with your boss?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide how much to admit. "Even if I was having problems in my marriage, that doesn't give you the right to stalk me." "Problems in our marriage? Is that what you're calling it?" "Jack, we both know this isn't working anymore. We want different things. We're different people than we were when we got married." "You're right," I said. "We are different people. I just didn't realize how different until recently." She seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting her. "So we're agreed? We should start talking about how to separate our lives in a way that's fair to both of us?" "Oh, we're going to separate our lives, all right. But fair is a relative term." Something in my tone made her look at me more carefully. "What do you mean?" I mean that I know exactly what you've been doing, Sabrina. I know about the affair, the hotel rooms, the lies you've been telling about me. I know about your plan to paint me as an abusive husband so you can take everything in the divorce. Her face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. But here's the thing. I have evidence. Recordings, photos, witnesses. So if you want to play games, we can play games. But you're not going to like how this ends. I walked past her toward the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Sabrina? I had an interesting conversation with Chip tonight. You might want to call him. I think he has some questions about your real connection. I left her standing in the kitchen and went upstairs to pack a bag. It was time for the final act of this drama, and I wanted to be ready for whatever came next. I spent the night at Mike's place, sleeping on his couch and planning my endgame. By morning, I had a strategy that would expose Sabrina's lies and end this nightmare once and for all. My first stop was the offices of Morrison, Klein & Associates, the law firm that handled my business contracts. I'd known David Morrison for 5 years, and he was the kind of lawyer who didn't mind getting his hands dirty when his clients were being screwed over. "Jack," he said when I walked into his office with a box of evidence, "you look like hell. What's going on?" I spent an hour laying out the entire situation, the affair, the lies, Sabrina's plan to defraud me in divorce court, and the evidence I'd gathered. David listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This is ugly," he said when I finished. "But you've done good work here. The recordings of her planning to commit perjury are particularly damaging. What's my next move?" "We're going to file for divorce first, before she has a chance to implement her strategy. And we're going to include everything: adultery, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. By the time we're done, she'll be lucky to get half of her own clothes." David made some calls while I waited, setting up meetings with a private investigator and a forensic accountant. By the end of the day, I had a legal team that would make Sabrina's life very complicated. But first, I had some personal business to finish. That evening, I drove to Sabrina's office building. According to her calendar, which I still had access to through our shared Google account, she was working late on a presentation for Chip. I suspected the presentation involved a lot less PowerPoint and a lot more horizontal collaboration. I waited in the lobby until I saw her coming out of the elevator with 2 of her colleagues. They were heading to the parking garage, chatting about weekend plans. "Sabrina," I called out. She turned and her face went pale when she saw me. "Jack, what are you doing here?" "I came to give you something." Her colleagues sensed the tension and made excuses to leave quickly. When we were alone, I handed her a manila envelope. "Divorce papers?" she asked. "Among other things. You should probably look at them when you get home." She opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, a petition for divorce citing adultery and fraud. Her hands started shaking as she read. "Jack, we can work this out. We don't need lawyers." "We don't. Because according to the recording I have of you talking to Hannah, you've already been meeting with lawyers for weeks." She looked up from the papers, her eyes wide with fear. "What recording?" I pulled out my phone and played a snippet of the audio from her office bug. Her voice filled the parking garage, coldly discussing how to document my supposed abusive behavior. "You bugged my office? I documented evidence of your criminal conspiracy. There's a difference." She flipped through the rest of the papers, photos of her and Chip at dinner, printouts of the hotel charges, screenshots of his text messages, a sworn statement from Mrs. Dorsey about the cars in our driveway. "You can't use any of this in court. It's illegal surveillance." "Actually, most of it's perfectly legal. The recording from your office might be inadmissible, but it doesn't matter. I have enough other evidence to prove you're a lying, cheating fraud." Sabrina leaned against a concrete pillar, looking like she might faint. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that your plan failed. You're not going to destroy my reputation, take my money, and ride off into the sunset with your boss. You're going to be exposed for exactly what you are." "Jack, please. We can work something out. I'll give you an uncontested divorce, 50-50 split of everything. You don't have to humiliate me. 50-50? After you tried to frame me as an abusive husband? After you brought your lover into our bed? After 8 years of marriage, you think you deserve half of everything I've worked for? I contributed to this marriage too. Really? By lying and cheating and planning to commit perjury? That's your contribution? She started crying then, but they were tears of frustration and fear, not genuine remorse. What about Chip? She asked. Are you going to destroy his life too? Chip and I already had our conversation. I think he understands the situation now. What did you do to him? I explained the consequences of his choices, very clearly. I turned to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Sabrina. You might want to call him. I have a feeling he's not going to be as supportive as you think. I left her in the parking garage, clutching the divorce papers and crying. It should have felt like victory, but mostly I just felt empty. The next morning, David Morrison called with an update. Your wife's attorney contacted me, he said. They want to negotiate. Already? Apparently she tried to call her boss last night and couldn't reach him. Then she showed up at his apartment building and found out he'd taken a sudden vacation, left town without telling anyone at work when he'd be back. I smiled. Chip was running scared, abandoning Sabrina just like I'd predicted. What kind of negotiation are they talking about? Full confession, uncontested divorce, she keeps her personal belongings and her car, you get the house, the business, the retirement accounts, everything else. That's it? No alimony? No property settlement? She's in no position to make demands, Jack. Her lawyer knows that if this goes to trial, she'll be destroyed. The adultery evidence alone would be damaging, but the recordings of her planning to commit fraud, that could result in criminal charges. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to drag her through a public trial, to expose her lies in front of a judge and jury, but another part of me just wanted this nightmare to end. I'll take the deal, I said, but I want it in writing, signed and notarized, and I want her out of the house by the end of the week. Done. 3 days later, I stood in my kitchen watching Sabrina pack the last of her belongings into boxes. She'd barely spoken to me since the lawyers worked out the settlement, communicating only through terse text messages about logistics. I never meant for it to happen this way, she said, as she taped up a box of dishes. How did you mean for it to happen? I don't know, I felt trapped, like my life was passing me by. So you decided to destroy mine instead? She didn't answer that. There really wasn't an answer that would make sense. Where are you going to live? I asked. Hannah's letting me stay with her until I find an apartment. Hannah. The same friend who'd helped her plan my destruction. They deserved each other. What happened to Chip? He's not taking my calls. His secretary says he's on extended medical leave. I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. She'd lost her husband, her lover, her job prospects, and most of her friends. The life she'd tried so hard to upgrade had collapsed completely. But then I remembered the recording of her voice, coldly planning to frame me as an abusive husband. I remembered the photos of her and Chip kissing on our front porch. I remembered the hotel bills and the lies and the 8 years of marriage she'd thrown away for a man who abandoned her the moment things got complicated. The moving truck will be here in an hour, she said. I'll be in the workshop. I spent the afternoon in my basement working on a cabinet for Mrs. Dorsey's kitchen. She'd hired me to do some renovations as a way of supporting my business during the divorce. It felt good to work with my hands, to create something useful and beautiful instead of dealing with lawyers and lies. When I finally came upstairs, the house was empty. Sabrina had left her keys on the kitchen counter, along with a note. I'm sorry it ended this way. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. Then I walked through the house, checking each room to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. In our bedroom, My bedroom now. I found one last surprise. The diamond earrings I'd given her for Christmas were sitting on the dresser. I picked them up and studied them in the light. They'd cost me 2 months' worth of profit from the business, money I'd gladly spent because I thought I was buying jewelry for the woman I'd spend the rest of my life with. Now they were just expensive reminders of how wrong I'd been. I put the earrings in my pocket and went to the kitchen to make dinner. For the first time in months, I was alone in my own house. No lies, no deception, no wondering what my wife was really doing when she said she was working late. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it just felt quiet. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "How you holding up, Jackie?" "Better than expected," I typed back. "Want to grab a beer at the Pilgrim's Rest? Be there in 20. I locked up the house and drove to the bar where Mike was waiting with Tiny and a few other friends. Word had gotten around about the divorce, and everyone wanted to buy me drinks and tell me I was better off without her. "To new beginnings," Mike said, raising his beer. "To new beginnings," I agreed. But as I sat there listening to my friends talk about second chances and fresh starts, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over yet. Sabrina was down, but she wasn't destroyed. And people like her had a way of landing on their feet, usually at someone else's expense. I was right to be cautious. 3 weeks later, David Morrison called with disturbing news. "Sabrina's filed a complaint with the state licensing board about your business. She's claiming you used company resources to stalk and harass her." "That's ridiculous." "It doesn't matter if it's ridiculous. She's trying to damage your professional reputation since she couldn't get your money." "What kind of complaint? Misuse of business equipment, unprofessional conduct, failure to maintain proper boundaries between personal and professional activities? It's all bullshit, but you'll have to respond formally." I hung up and stared at my phone. Even in defeat, Sabrina was still trying to hurt me. She couldn't stand the fact that I'd outmaneuvered her, so now she was going after my livelihood. That's when I realized that my revenge had been incomplete. I'd focused on protecting myself and exposing her lies, but I hadn't actually made her pay for what she'd done. She was still out there, still scheming, still trying to destroy me. It was time to finish what I'd started. The complaint to the licensing board was just the beginning. Over the next month, Sabrina launched a campaign of petty harassment that would have impressed a middle school bully. She left negative reviews for my business on every website she could find, claiming I was unstable and unprofessional. She called my clients to warn them about my erratic behavior. She even contacted my suppliers to spread rumors about my financial situation. Each attack was small enough to seem insignificant, but together they were designed to slowly strangle my business. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and it was working. I lost 3 clients in 2 weeks. My materials supplier started demanding payment up front instead of extending credit. The licensing board scheduled a hearing to investigate her complaints. "She's trying to force you into bankruptcy," David Morrison explained during one of our meetings. "If she can't get your money through divorce, she'll destroy your ability to earn money." "What can we do about it?" "Legally? Not much. She's being careful to stay just inside the boundaries of what's permissible. We could file a harassment suit, but it would be expensive and hard to prove." "So she just gets away with it?" David shrugged. "Unless you can find a way to make her stop voluntarily." That evening, I sat in the Pilgrim's Rest, nursing a beer and thinking about my options. The bar was busy for a Thursday night, filled with the usual crowd of neighborhood regulars and office workers unwinding after long days. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed her walking in. Sabrina entered the bar like she owned the place, wearing a new dress and expensive shoes that she definitely couldn't afford on her unemployment benefits. She was with Hannah and 2 other women I didn't recognize, all of them laughing and talking loudly. They took a table near the back, and I watched from my spot at the bar as Sabrina held court, gesturing dramatically while telling some story that had her companions hanging on every word. "Well, well," Murphy the bartender said quietly. "Look what the cat dragged in." Murphy had been tending bar at the Pilgrim's Rest for 30 years, and he knew everyone's business. He'd also heard all the rumors about my divorce and Sabrina's affair. "She's got some nerve showing up here," he continued, "after what she did to you." "It's a free country," I said. "Maybe, but this is my bar, and I don't have to serve people I don't like." I was about to tell him not to cause a scene when I heard Sabrina's voice carry across the room. Completely delusional. He actually thought he could ruin my life with some amateur detective work. As if I didn't know exactly what he was doing the whole time. Her friends laughed, and she continued her performance. The man followed me around like some kind of stalker, broke into my office to plant bugs, threatened my colleagues. I'm lucky to be alive, honestly. More laughter. She was rewriting history again, turning herself into the victim and me into the villain, and people were buying it. The best part is that he thinks he won something. He gets to keep his little house and his little business, but he lost the best thing that ever happened to him. He'll spend the rest of his life wondering what could have been. That was too much. I stood up from my bar stool and walked over to their table. "Sabrina." She looked up, and for just a moment I saw fear flash across her face. Then she composed herself and smiled coldly. "Jack, how nice to see you. Ladies, this is my ex-husband, the one I was just telling you about." "I couldn't help but overhear your story," I said. "Very creative. You always did have a talent for fiction." "I was just sharing my experience with friends. Is that a problem?" "Not at all. In fact, I'd like to share some of my own experiences. Would you mind if I joined you?" Before she could answer, I pulled up a chair and sat down. The other women looked uncomfortable, but Sabrina maintained her fake smile. "I was just telling them about your stalking behavior," she said. "How you followed me around, invaded my privacy, made wild accusations." "Wild accusations," I repeated. "Like the fact that you were having an affair with your boss?" "That's exactly what I mean. Paranoid delusions." I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. "Would you like me to play the recording of you and Hannah discussing your affair? Or maybe the one where you talk about framing me as an abusive husband?" Sabrina's face went white, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I don't know what you think you have, but I have everything, Sabrina. Audio recordings, video footage, financial records, witness statements. I have your lover's text messages and photos of you two together. I have proof of every lie you told and every scheme you planned." The other women were staring now, and conversations at nearby tables had stopped. The entire bar was listening to our exchange. "You want to tell stories about me?" I continued. "Let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how you brought your boss to our house while I was working. Let's discuss the hotel rooms you charged to our credit card. Let's share the recording where you laugh about how trusting and stupid I was." "Jack, stop," she said quietly. "Stop? But I'm just getting started. These ladies should know what kind of person they're having drinks with. They should know that you're the type of woman who would destroy her husband's reputation to cover up her own adultery." By now, the entire bar was silent, except for my voice. Murphy was watching from behind the bar with obvious satisfaction. "You see, ladies, Sabrina here thought she was smarter than everyone else. She thought she could cheat on her husband, steal his money, and frame him as an abuser. She thought she could rewrite history and make herself the victim." I stood up and looked down at my ex-wife, who was now visibly shaking. "But here's the thing about the truth. It has a way of coming out. And the truth is that Sabrina Whitmore is a lying, cheating, manipulative fraud who destroyed her own life through greed and stupidity." The silence in the bar was deafening. Every eye was on Sabrina, who looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "Now," I said, "if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run, a successful business that's thriving despite your best efforts to destroy it." I started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and Sabrina? The licensing board dismissed your complaint this morning. Apparently they don't take seriously accusations from vindictive ex-wives with no evidence, but I'm sure you'll think of something else to try." I left her sitting there, with her mouth open while the entire bar stared. By the time I reached the door, conversations were starting up again. But now they were about Sabrina, not with her. Outside, I took a deep breath of cool night air and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete satisfaction. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Well played. She had it coming. A friend. I smiled and deleted the message. Whoever had sent me that first warning about Sabrina trying to ruin me had been watching the whole time, waiting to see how it would end. The next morning, David Morrison called with good news. I don't know what you did, but it worked. Sabrina's attorney called to say she's dropping all harassment activities and wants to sign a non-disclosure agreement. What kind of NDA? She agrees to stop interfering with your business and making public statements about your marriage. In exchange, you agree not to share the recordings or other evidence publicly. What's the catch? No catch. She's scared, Jack. Whatever happened last night spooked her badly enough that she wants to disappear and start over somewhere else. I thought about it for a moment. The NDA would prevent me from completely destroying her reputation, but it would also guarantee that she'd leave me alone. I'll sign it, I said, but I want a clause that voids the agreement if she violates it even once. Done. 2 weeks later, I heard from Hannah that Sabrina had moved to California to stay with a cousin. She'd given up her apartment, closed her social media accounts, and essentially vanished from Boston. Chip Fairchild had also disappeared, though in his case it was into a rehabilitation facility for stress and anxiety. Word around town was that his wife had found out about the affair and taken him for everything he was worth in their divorce. I was in my workshop one evening, putting the finishing touches on Mrs. Dorsey's kitchen cabinets, when Mike stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. So, he said, settling into an old chair I kept for visitors, how does it feel to be a free man? Expensive, I said, sanding a cabinet door. Divorce lawyers aren't cheap. But worth it? I thought about the question while I worked. Was it worth it? I'd lost my wife, spent a fortune on legal fees, and gone through months of stress and uncertainty. But I'd also learned who I really was when pushed to the limit, and I'd discovered that I was stronger and smarter than I'd given myself credit for. Yeah, I said finally, it was worth it. Any regrets? Just one. I wish I'd figured out what she was doing sooner. Could have saved myself a lot of pain. Mike nodded and opened 2 beers, handing one to me. You know what the best part is? What's that? She thought she was so clever, so much smarter than you. And in the end, you outplayed her completely. She lost everything. Her husband, her lover, her job, her friends, her reputation. You came out ahead. He was right. Sabrina had started this war thinking she could destroy me and walk away with everything I'd worked for. Instead, she'd lost everything while I kept what mattered most. To new beginnings, Mike said, raising his beer. To new beginnings, I agreed. But as we sat there drinking and talking about the future, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Sabrina had called me paranoid and delusional, but in the end, I'd been the one with a clear view of reality. She'd been living in a fantasy world where actions didn't have consequences, and lies didn't catch up with you. Now, she was living in a different kind of reality, one where she had to face the consequences of her choices every single day. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Dorsey. Jack, dear, I just heard the most interesting rumor about your ex-wife. Apparently, she's working as a waitress in Los Angeles. How the mighty have fallen. I showed the message to Mike, who started laughing. A waitress? From corporate HR executive to waitress? That's beautiful, Jackie, absolutely beautiful. I had to agree. There was something poetic about Sabrina, who'd always looked down on service workers and blue-collar people like me, now depending on tips from strangers to pay her rent. You know what the best part is? I said. She did it all to herself. Every single consequence, every bit of suffering, every loss. It all came from her own choices. I just made sure she couldn't blame anyone else for them. Mike raised his beer again. To consequences. To consequences, I echoed. And as we sat there in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented my real life, the life Sabrina had tried to destroy, I realized that I'd won something more valuable than money or property. I'd won the truth. And in the end, that was worth everything.